Yes, thank you. It's now over 3 years since I stood in this chamber and made my first speech. At that time I was very mindful of the responsibility and the trust the voters of South Australia had placed in me. In 2011, I looked forward to my future work in the Senate with a mixture of both urgency and optimism. Today, just halfway through my term, or just over, it's a good time to take stock. I'm still very conscious of the trust and responsibility I carry, and it's clear to me that there is so very much to do to see the kind of Australia that I want to bequeath to my kids. A healthy, fair and caring society, and one where we all have a chance to participate fully, to live together in peace and feel proud of who we are, no matter our nationality, our religion, our wealth or our sexuality. It will embody some of the best aspects of the Australia where I grew up, with a unifying belief in the principle of giving people a fair go and a strong sense of connection and community. The urgency I felt 3 years ago has not abated, and I am still optimistic because in the end it is the only option. But we must never take progress for granted. We must remain vigilant and fight to make sure we don't go backwards at the whim of a relatively few powerful people who are effective and ruthless at advancing their own interests, even though it damages or destroys many others. The struggle to combat climate change, to urgently reduce the carbon pollution which threatens our very future, is a case in point. The renewable energy target and carbon pricing on electricity saw the electricity generating sector reduce carbon dioxide emissions by 18% since 2008. But the government has demolished the carbon price and has deliberately caused uncertainty about the renewable energy target to prop up the profits of its troubled fossil fuel backers. Since then, the electricity-related carbon emissions are already up 2.1% since June last year, even though electricity output actually fell. This government's deliberate strategy to erode investor confidence in renewable energy has been successful so far. There's been an 88% drop in large-scale renewable energy investment in 2014 in Australia, seeing our global position drop from number 11 to number 39 behind renewable energy luminaries like Burma, Panama and Costa Rica. My state of South Australia has a very proud track record when it comes to renewable energy. It was number 1 for solar again in 2014 and provided 49% of Australia's total capacity for wind. The renewable energy industry is crucial for South Australia's economy. If the RET remains in its current form, there will be an extra $2.3 billion in large-scale renewable investment by 2020, with the creation of 2,490 extra jobs, and those jobs are needed in South Australia. The alternative, reducing the RET, would be unconscionable. A loss of that $2.3 billion investment, 990 jobs lost, increasing power bills, local businesses going overseas and South Australia having to buy more coal and gas from interstate. Any political parties that take us in that direction will stand condemned now and in the future. Our collective fate depends on preserving the environmental assets which sustain life on Earth. The case for protecting the environment is even clearer today than it was in 2011. Every week there's more information to remind us of the way we're overusing the Earth's resources and the consequences. And yet we have a government which has systematically downgraded measures to protect the environment we all rely on so many fronts: delisting World Heritage, reinstating logging, winding back marine parks, defunding the legal services that help citizens defend the environment on behalf of all of us. How ironic that this is a government which is fond of talking about intergenerational equity. Just last Friday it was the Environment Minister, Greg Hunt, of all people, who praised his government for ensuring that we're not leaving a massive legacy for the next generation of transferring costs of the next generation. But that's exactly what they are doing when it comes to environmental integrity. It doesn't get much more inequitable than to trash the fundamentals of survival, the atmosphere and the environment we live in, leaving our children and our grandchildren with a planet that will struggle to sustain life and a diminishing number of species to share it with. I'll now turn to education because it's hard to think of a more important or pressing investment in our human capital. In my first speech, I spoke of the importance of quality public education as a force for building understanding and empathy by bringing Australian kids together and transcending divisions. This seems even more important at this point, at a time when our community has the potential to become more and more fractured, geographically by wealth and privilege, and culturally by background, nationality or religion. 3 years on, I'm the Australian Greens spokesperson for schools, and I want to see a great school for every kid, no matter where they live, country or city, and no matter how wealthy their parents are, no matter whether they're Aboriginal or have recently come to Australia from overseas, and no matter whether or not they have a disability. Although we hear a lot of talk about more school choice these days, I believe that real choice, meaningful choice, means having the choice to send your child to the local school knowing they'll have access to a quality education. A school that's properly resourced with well-supported teachers, strong leadership, buildings and grounds in good condition, warm in winter, cool in summer, the materials and technology that are necessary for learning in the modern world, and a curriculum that includes academic subjects but is also rich in music, sport, art and creativity. The only way to ensure this, what should be a minimum standard of education for all children, is to have a public education system which is properly funded and supported and available to every child. If parents want to opt out of such a system and choose another option, that's their choice. But let that not be because, as a society, we have not chosen to support and value the system that still guarantees an education for the majority of kids. I'm not describing a Rolls-Royce education system here. I'm describing the minimum that we as a community should be able to expect if we want to ensure that every kid in Australia has the opportunity to reach their potential. And why wouldn't we? What society can afford to miss out on the intellectual capital of so many of its young people? The Gonski panel recommended an increased investment in education of $5 billion a year. That would bring us closer to the OECD average and help our poor performance in global literacy and mathematics assessments. And they recommended that this funding should be distributed on the basis of need. Just imagine a great school for every kid. What would that look like in Australia? When I made my first speech, I remarked on the legal fictions that successive Australian governments have used to deny our international responsibility for refugees who come to us seeking a place of asylum. Since then, we've seen a government that has unilaterally rewritten the Refugee Convention to suit its own grubby domestic politics so that people can be returned to a country where they face torture or worse. I also remarked on the growing divide between rich and poor in Australia, and there's no indication that that's getting any better. I'm saddened to think that these issues and many others remain with us. There is undoubtedly much more work to be done if we are to prevent Australia from becoming a country where people believe they can only survive and prosper at the expense of others. I'll continue to do that work. As I said in my first speech, when I stand here to make my last speech, I'd like to think that I've contributed to making Australia a kinder, fairer place. If we practice kindness and fairness, I believe we can meet the challenges that this century undoubtedly brings us. If we act fairly, we will balance Australia's interests with those of other nations. We will balance the interests of our species with the needs of others, and by doing that we will actually enhance our own chance of survival. And we will balance the needs of today with the needs of tomorrow. That's what the Greens stand for. That's why I'm proud to be an Australian Greens senator. In my future work in this parliament, I will continue to be guided by my belief that we don't just inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. That is a guiding principle and one that we would all be wise to remember.